Welcome back to Decoding the Digital Lab, the podcast where we cut through the high level noise to tackle the real world realities of laboratory informatics, data, and automation. I'm your host, Megan Pettyjohn. Today is an exciting milestone for us. We are officially 1 year old. To celebrate our first anniversary, we've brought back the perfect guest. He was our very first interviewee in episode 1. He has over 40 years of experience in lab automation, and he's the founding president and CEO of CSols, Kyle McDuffie. Kyle, welcome back.
Well, thanks, Megan, and happy anniversary to you and the whole team. It's hard to believe it's already been a year. And the industry and the world has moved at hyperspeed since we last spoke. So I think it's the perfect time to look back on the last year and to look forward into the one coming up.
Well, let's take a bird's eye view of the industry as a whole. I want to break down the last year into two major buckets: the year of AI and the year of chaos. Let's start with the year of chaos because geopolitically, it's been a wild ride for international business.
Well, that's an understatement for sure, Megan. For the purpose of our discussion today, I'd like to focus on two industry sectors specifically: life sciences and diversified industries. And diversified industries would include chemicals, petrochemicals, oil and gas, uh, all the downstream products from that. And within that subset, two types of laboratories specifically being quality control and research and development, to look at the impacts from those groups. So if you look at the macro environment in the last 12 months, businesses in these spaces have had to operate against an immense backdrop of global friction. You're seeing ongoing conflicts in the Ukraine. I think it's year 4 for that. War in the Middle East, Iran, Lebanon, Gaza, Strait of Hormuz, all that stuff, which has really disrupted the whole supply chain for a lot of businesses in a generational fashion, once in a generation, really, for diversified industrials. Plus, we've seen massive shifts in trade policy. America first, buy Canada, European Union, working on things, China, etc. Threats of sweeping tariffs up until today. There was new ones announced yesterday, followed by sudden rollbacks and constant trade rebalancing. So that's really affected the diversified industrials. For life sciences, more specifically, we've seen a revolving door of leadership at the FDA. So it's really uncertain what's happening there. The reversal of long-standing scientific approaches to certain types of drug approval processes, for example, or about vaccines, and as well as uncertainty related to the viability of drug manufacturing in other countries versus manufacturing here in the US.
Yeah, it felt like a total whiplash. 1 week, a lab is preparing for heavy tariffs on raw materials, and then the next week, those political shifts again. It was exhausting. Racing to get ahead only to have to stop and pivot. But with that uncertainty, it forces a lab to become incredibly agile so they can keep projects moving across borders.
Yes, that's very true. But I think let's talk about the impacts, though. So they're very different depending on what type of laboratory you're in and what type of environment you're in. So let's take quality control first. So by definition, if you're in an existing facility supporting a manufacturing facility somewhere, uh, the impact on you is relatively small, but there's a lot of impact on where new manufacturing might be located and new facilities might be built. So that's pretty dramatic. But if you're already existing, you're still making the products you were making before, you're testing them, you're evaluating the quality raw materials, all of that kind of stuff. For R&D labs, there's been a lot of impact, particularly in life sciences, as companies have tried to determine where they're going to have their R&D spending, both in the US and globally, based on either the specific disease portfolio they're working on or based on the interpretation of the future of the regulatory landscape here in the US with all of the turnover and change within the FDA. So that's kind of what's happening in the physical world. So lots of uncertainty, lots of chaotic things going on. I think the secondary part of this is what's happening in the digital world, which is really the year of AI. So 2025 up until the present time has really could be determined as when AI has really come to the forefront of the world in the digital world. So over the past 365 days, we moved from what I would call fairly simplistic writing of emails, ChatGPT supporting that, summarizing meetings, harvesting knowledge that's on the internet through Claude, many iterations of Google changing their search engine, deploying AI for Gemini to basically help you answer more complex questions. So we moved from that to that being ubiquitously used across many, many industries in a very large way. And that includes starting with sort of the what I would call the unregulated environments, which would be customer service, sales, banking, gaming, marketing, and software development as well. So I would say scientific applications have lagged a little bit behind in terms of implementation of these things simply because of the tolerance for error is a little bit less than other environments. But in 2025, that's what was going on. In 2026, we've really seen the rise of AI agents, which are quite a bit more capable, which is autonomous software that doesn't just answer some questions or help you craft the document, but can actually make decisions, write code, and execute complex workflows.
Right. It's a complete shift from this passive chatbot that we're used to an actual like active assistant running things in the background. And pulling humans away from those stable, repetitive tasks is a massive cost saver. But looking at the timeline, when the year of chaos collided with this year of AI, how did labs actually handle that intersection? Did they pivot immediately?
So again, I'd say the answer depends on the laboratory you're in and the specific business strategy with the company you work for. I think in 2025, initially, most companies had already had a budget and plans, and they were not sure what was really going to happen. So they were riding the stormy waves and expecting things to return to normal. So I think digital transformation was the buzzword of the day about a year ago, and that everyone was trying to do that, and that still remains the goal today. But they weren't dramatically changing unless they were forced to do so based on some event that specifically impacted their particular business and their particular type of laboratory. I think right about the summertime of last year and early fall, it became pretty clear that chaos was going to be the new normal. It wasn't going to go back to the way it was before. And I believe that people spent the fall of 2025 working on what their strategy would be going forward to allow them to be more flexible, to deal with that chaos more effectively, to look at opportunities that might come from that, and also very much so to reduce their controllable costs, to then give them more ability to flex because the controllable cost is usually the people, the number of employees that you have. Out of that, I think a lot of companies have bet on the deployment of AI tools as a key pathway to those two ends. One, increase flexibility to take advantage and to pivot of opportunities and chaos, and secondly, to reduce controllable costs, i.e., people. So, as you're seeing early in 2026 from January till now, is a lot of disruption in the workforce in some industries as tools get adopted. In some cases, preemptively eliminating staff before the value has been gained from the tools.
So that brings us to today. We survived the first year, but what's going to happen in the next 12 months? So, as we head into this next year, what does the immediate future look like for science, for software, and actual employment?
So, looking ahead for the next 12 months, I don't have a crystal ball, nor more than anyone else, but I do believe a couple of things. I do think that AI disruption through the deployment of agents is well on its way. So it began last year, it's continuing now. There's a lot of hype and there's a lot of promised cost savings, and this year will be the year of doing the hard work to make it real. So it's either going to be real or not, depending on the company you're in. I believe that people are deploying these tools within scientific software products, whereas they were really in the early days of that last year. You're seeing the impact on IT infrastructure, the build out of data centers and all of that. And you're also seeing that key scientific workflows, which have less tolerance for plausibility versus realness, are actually going to be significantly impacted. So that brings up a massive issue, which I think everyone should pay attention to, and that is data quality. So everyone wants to build cool models and agents based on their unique institutional knowledge that they have within their organization to get a competitive advantage. Um, Unfortunately, though, I think the proliferation of very low cost AI tools and also some of the hype has led a lot of organizations down the path of something called vibe coding, which was actually voted word of the year in 2025.
Oh, okay. Well, for our listeners who haven't heard that phrase before, can you share what vibe coding means?
So vibe coding is basically using AI, advanced multi-step AI agents to write code, scripts, data parsers to basically deal with problems without utilizing someone to do it who actually understands the specifics of the underlying architecture or necessarily the underlying code base. So this provides a lot of speed, speeds up the development of applications much faster. The downside is that sometimes people just test it a couple of times with a very limited data set and say, "Yeah, feels right, vibe feels good. Let's deploy and push it into production." Hence the name vibe coding. In a regulated or scientific environment, vibe coding can be a recipe for disaster because the if the data quality that you've fed into the model or into the code that you vibed, well, hasn't been adequately verified, then your AI is going to produce something called hallucinations, which is outcomes that may be possible but aren't true, or it could misinterpret critical scientific metrics. And I believe that in the next 12 months, those that have done a good job of verifying the inputs, doing code reviews, extensive testings, etc., will do well, and the bill for bad data will come due to those that don't. And the old adage of garbage in and garbage out is still true even in the AI age.
That is a trend we are hearing a lot in our podcasts, garbage in, garbage out, which is such a vital warning. In science, good vibes don't pass an FDA or ISO audit. Excellent data integrity does. It reminds me of the broader anxiety people have right now about employment. With AI agents getting smarter and automation scaling up, a lot of folks are wondering, will robots eventually replace scientists? Or is this just the next iteration of tools we've always used?
Well, that's a really good question. So I'll just give my opinion. I believe that robotics is definitely one of the latest iterations of tools we've used in the past. We used to call it different things, but it's basically laboratory and process automation as applied to our situation. I do believe it's much better than ever has been in my working career. So it's closer to a real thing than it ever has been. However, I don't believe that we need to worry about humanoid robots and AI replacing scientists on the bench. I do believe that they're very effective tools which can speed up data analysis, data generation, data review, and will allow the scientists to actually do more of the real science, which is generating new hypotheses, complex problem solving, and driving innovation.
Well, that is a very reassuring take. It's about the elevation, not replacement. Now, looking at the macro side for the next year, are we going to see emerging stability or are we heading into a second year of chaos? And more importantly, how do businesses navigate to success in this environment?
Well, unfortunately, it looks to me, anyways, that it's another year of chaos coming up. And so we need to get used to it and we need to look for opportunities within that chaotic environment from a geopolitical standpoint and by extension, that means on the business side of things. From a laboratory's perspective, digital transformation is still the goal, but got to ask yourself, what exactly does that mean for scientific systems and quality control and R&D labs specifically? So I think there's really two approaches, and I think that are going on across the world. One is the good enough, and the second is no, we still need excellence. So the good enough route is basically patching up your legacy systems, doing some vibe coding and reducing your personnel costs so that you're going to ride out the wave of whatever chaos that's going on. I don't think that's a recipe for thriving. I do think there's a lot of money that can be spent on tools that may or may not prove valuable if you do that, but that's one approach. The second approach is a little bit slower, and I think some of these companies will do uh, they'll choose excellence. They'll still invest heavily in the technology, but they'll spend more time on making sure that they're properly organized, that they have guardrails in place. There's something called a verification gap, which is basically making sure that things actually work before you deploy them. There's something called a human in the loop, which means you don't make it fully autonomous. You make it semi-autonomous in certain places, requires a human intervention. You work in the pilot mode first and then the production mode. There's a bunch of ways of doing this to make sure that you get the value. And the smart companies that are going to thrive are going to do that. They'll be outcomes driven, there'll be appropriate guardrails in place.
Yeah, good enough might keep the lights on today, but excellence is what future proofs businesses for tomorrow. So, speaking of excellence, Kyle, as we wrap up our episode, can you share one piece of advice to our listeners on how to excel in the use of AI over the next 365 days?
Well, let me give you a couple of thoughts. I don't know if I can just give you one. So I think the first thing I would say is remember that uh, AI is just another tool in the toolbox. Very important one, yes, but it's a tool in the toolbox that you use to achieve the business outcome you need. It's got to stay focused on what is the problem you're solving. By itself, they're not value generators. Cool technology doesn't mean improvement in business value. And secondly, if you go down the path of deploying AI tools, make sure that you do it with excellence, using taking advantage of guardrails, making sure that you close the verification gap, utilizing pilots, doing human in the loop at the appropriate time.
Excellent advice. And that was a great recap. So, thank you so much for coming back to celebrate our 1 year anniversary of Decoding the Digital Lab with us.
Well, great. It's been an honor, Megan. I can't wait to see where we go in the next year.
Me too. And to our listeners, if you want to avoid the traps of vibe coding and build an excellent AI ready data foundation, head over to CSolsInc.com to explore our resources. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Until next time.